a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and a geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, presented by Blackstack Brewing, your friendly neighborhood Merc merchant now in a store near you. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic. Or obviously rusty John Bonus with Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
I'd say mid-season form. But each their own.
It's off-season form.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Rusty implies
I'm gonna need some spring training.
there's a higher level of performance at some point. But
that's
I don't know.
Point.
John is back from his month-long
sojourn
holiday, as our friend Dua Lipa, Patreon subscribers know, would call it. Through first you went to Hawaii, then you went to Australia, then you went back to Hawaii. Now you're home for a few weeks at least. And you'll be going to Florida for spring training.
Myers, right.
It is I was thinking like you've been gone for a month, and we basically now have slightly less than now a month until pitchers and catchers report to spring training. I think it's February 13th, I want to say, something like that for the Twins. And, you know, this is not breaking new ground to discuss this, but it really has gotten to the point that it is, to me, remarkable how little they've done.
It's been impressive
on any front. And
now, to be fair, we said that a lot of off seasons.
I was thinking about that. I think that we're confusing like the lack of impact moves or the lack of sort of holes being filled in previous off seasons, or honestly, the lack of money being spent. Like when we have an idea of what we think their payroll is going to be in past off seasons, go back 3 years ago. We thought, they'll probably have $150, $160 million payroll. They enter January at 120, and we're like, something's got to give. But most of those years, they've already made some type of trade, some type of minor signing, some type of
often we talk
extension.
Often we talk in late November, early December how they have quote unquote been setting a floor at a position. Like they've gone and done something to sort of make now. The truth is, there weren't a lot of floors that necessarily needed to be set.
True.
In this particular one.
They had the floors kind of already in place with a lot of their in-house guys. But, they have almost literally done nothing. They took a Rule 5 guy, Iverson Castellano, and they made 2 trades, one for Mickey Gasper, who we talked about on the last show, and one for Diego Cartaya, who we are going to talk about in a segment or two on this show.
I just took a look at when the Santana signing was. That was February 7th last year.
Yeah.
That was pretty
But they had
late.
already signed
They'd already
Josh
traded
Stallman.
They'd already traded Polanco.
They traded Polanco, although not that much
that
before
much
that.
like a week before.
I don't mean like, yes, they have very often under Falvey reached this point or even later in an offseason not having made what would ultimately end up as their biggest or even like their 2 biggest moves. However, I do think this is uncommon in that by this point of the offseason, they had typically done something.
Some major league signing.
If only
some major league
to trade
contract.
someone away or to extend someone or to sign a middle reliever, and to have not even done that, it just strikes me as strange. I mean, we know the explanation for it, which is they have no money to spend.
Right.
But even within that, I certainly would have bet on them adding someone via free agency or trade on a major league contract by 4 weeks out from spring training. And so I will ask you.
Or have traded away some salary. Right.
So, or have traded somebody on major
That
league.
was, I think,
which they've done neither of. And it's a strange feeling. I mean, it sucks as 2 guys who talk about this stuff. It doesn't really give us. That's why John had to flee the hemisphere. But.
I picked a good off season to take a 4-week vacation.
I was
a trip out of the country.
Not to name drop, but I was a guest on AJ Pierzynski's. It's called Foul Territory.
Yeah,
which I go on like every.
Yeah, I heard he got a little feisty about.
He always rants about the Twins, and he always about ownership and payroll and stuff, and he always brings up the '90s when he was there and all that, and he always says he always is ranting, and he says what seems like he's saying to me, but I know he's not.
Right.
He's like, I don't want to hear any excuses about this. I don't want to. And I'm always like, brother, you're not going to hear him here. Like, I co-sign that. And we're probably going to get a text from the same 3 people after this saying, calm down. But I went on, and he, his host, it was him, Cameron Maben, the former outfielder, which I had never talked to him before, and then Eric Kratz, who was a catcher in the majors. And their ringleader, the Ernie Johnson of their Inside the NBA type crew, is Scott Braun.
Oh, okay.
Who I think is actually a fan of ours. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Scott. Thank you.
And that's really the only mark against him, as far as I can tell, as a person. So anyway, I go on the show, and they're like, welcome in, Twins beat writer from The Athletic, whatever, Aaron Gleeman. Aaron, he says something like, Scott says something like, I don't even know where to start. There's been so much action with the Twin.
Well done, Scott.
And I said, I brought up your name.
Yeah.
If you want to hear the name John Bonus on YouTube.
Okay.
And I said, well, I got to tell you, my co-host John Bonus took a literal month-long vacation
overseas
to Australia, came back, and there was not a single thing he missed that mattered. And so it is a very strange feeling, and I do think that.
So thanks for joining for the show, folks. We'll talk to you again next week.
I mean, what it creates is, as you'll hear in the coming hour, we're going to talk about some smaller stuff that maybe would have been a 2-minute discussion previously. Yeah, doesn't mean it can't be interesting, but hopefully we'll see.
We got to run through 5 ads quick first.
But but here's my question now at this point.
Right.
We're less than a month out until spring training. And they have made moves in spring training in years past.
Sure,
so
of course.
I'm not saying that is like a cutoff point, but
we just mentioned Polanco. I mean, they've done.
Yeah, like Solano strolled in
that's true.
midway through spring
right.
training.
Right.
There's a few examples of that.
Logan Morrison,
Marwin Gonzalez.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember I got to spring training before he was signed. I know that because we talked to him like as he was coming. He had his luggage with him.
The
I think
first Correa contract might have been during spring training, was it not?
I can't remember. I don't think so. But anyway, here's my question to you now, and this is something I've sort of been pondering as I write stuff about this. The lack of moves is, we just kind of keep saying, well, something's coming, something. Are we certain there's going to be a move?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, I've lost. I still would bet on it. I mean, but I've lost faith in it being sort of inevitable.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like,
by move, do you mean an addition?
I mean, no, because I never really. Well, I do think there will be an addition. However, what I mean is a arrival or departure of someone on a major league contract.
Okay, that's okay. Well,
is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
someone who will be on the opening day roster, either leaving or coming.
I would still bet on one of those two things happening before opening
as would
day.
But I no longer view it as only a matter of time.
I wouldn't give heavy odds on it.
Right.
Yeah. Would you give 2-1 odds?
I don't know.
Is there a 66% chance?
You're gambling brained from being on the power trip. Taking meat sauces $50 every week or whatever you do. Who's the latest victim who you just took money from? You did some sort of...
I don't know. I can't keep track of them all.
I got to get on there when Tommy Olson is on there and just fade the Gophers over and over at the beginning of every season.
That's right.
Because he's at the point now where he's betting like on them winning the national championship.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's just you guys are taking advantage of a guy who just has Gopher brain.
They don't let me on the show with him anymore.
Right. I saw he bet $300 that they were going to make the playoff next year of college football, and I'm like, are they expanding to 64 teams?
That can't be right.
I got to get on. I need another source of income. Anyway, hi Tommy. So yeah, I guess I was thinking of that. Like, am I certain now at this point? I still, the possibilities on that front, like the most likely comings or goings, haven't really changed. Because why would they change? Because there hasn't been any moves to set off like a domino effect of anything. Right. In other words, it's not like they even signed like a priority minor league reliever or something that would make us think, oh, they're set there, or a right-handed bat that they haven't done a damn thing. Right. And the stuff that they have done, I mean, the only two moves they've made to bring in somebody for the 40-man roster are Cartaya and Gasper.
Right.
And I think both of them are somewhat intriguing, and I got the logic behind the moves, and I have no problem with going to get them. We'll talk about Cartaya later. Right. But neither of those guys, I mean, Cartaya is definitely not going to be in the opening day roster, and I think Gasper is a pretty big long shot to be on the opening day roster. And so there's been nothing... you've lost your free agents. You've lost Kepler. You've lost Santana, Thielbar, all those guys. Manny Margot still available. Still available to re-sign.
Is he?
Yeah. I think we just see if he has like any production skills or third co-host type of
I
situation.
love this idea.
Yeah. He's a nice
Is he a
enough
video
fella.
guy?
He's got a good beard. That would look. I mean, let me put it this way: he's better looking than either of us.
Fair.
So,
sure.
but this table is better looking than two of us. Right. And so there hasn't been anything that would set in motion a domino effect, or like even open another hole that we didn't expect it on the roster. And so it's the same three things. It's like Vasquez, Paddock, Castro as a possible trade / salary dump / whatever, and we'll talk about some Jeremy Zoll quotes. He did a interview with CCO, I think, and then also yesterday did one with Dan Hayes where Dan wrote about this morning some Zoll quotes because now Jeremy Zoll has been promoted to GM, which means you're going to start to see and hear and read his quotes more because he's going to take some of that responsibility from Falvey, who Falvey was just the quote giver always.
That's right.
We can parse some of that, and for the most part, what he said. And we got deeper into the weeds on this on the Patreon side, so we won't recap the whole thing. But if you want a whole breakdown of some of Zoll's comments, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. But the gist of it was him saying, we don't have to shed salary.
Right.
We could.
By opening day.
Right. We could. Well, yeah.
There were caveats.
We could start the season kind of as is, but I don't think that's necessarily a change from what we expected. Our kind of emphasis on shedding salary wasn't so much about them getting under some kind of mythical or self-imposed bar for payroll, although I'm sure the Pohlads would probably enjoy that.
Sure.
But it wasn't like someone was going to stop you, at 11:59 on opening day.
It's not like it's not like in the NBA or on the NFL where on such and such day you have to be below this number.
You don't have to be cap compliant.
That is correct. And there are opportunities to drop salary after opening day, specifically the trade deadline.
I mean, the other thing is we've been kind of operating as if they'll have $130 million payroll just because what we were told at the end of the season was we're not dropping payroll from where it was in 2024.
Right.
Well, it was at 130 in 2024.
Right. That's right.
That doesn't mean it can't be 137 or 140.
Right.
I just know the Twins well enough to know that.
Well, and they've also said we aren't necessarily increasing pay. We aren't increasing payroll.
But I do think both those things can still be, can exist simultaneously, which is, right now they're at between 135 and 140, depending on how you want to choose to calculate the payroll in terms of average annual value of contracts or the actual per year value. With like Correa, there's a few $1 million difference there.
Sure.
I don't think it's crazy to be like, oh, they're going to start the season with $138 million payroll, even though in our minds we've been talking about 130. That doesn't strike me as news necessarily, although I know a lot of people heard that and were like, oh, what does that mean? But here's the ultimately why we've spent so long talking about trades and stuff, or salary subtracting trades. Our assumption was they were going to try to bring in a first baseman, a right-handed hitting corner outfielder, a new backup infielder to replace, Farmer or whatever. Like there were some areas of this team, and I'm not saying they were gaping holes. I mean, you do have Miranda at first base. You can certainly roll with, Austin Martin as your right-handed hitting corner outfielder or something. It's not ideal, but my assumption was they're going to want to bring in a Carlos Santana type. Whether it was Carlos Santana himself, that ship has sailed, obviously. Someone who's $5 million or $8 million, some veteran, whatever, first base, some bat. The reason we've been so focused on trade possibilities isn't that we think they have to get under and be cap compliant. Right. It's that if they're at 138 or 140, even if there's some wiggle room from 130 as a payroll, there ain't wiggle room to add a $10 million first baseman. The only way to really logically do that, unless there's been a real
or even a $5 million
change of mentality from an ownership perspective, we'll talk a lot more about the sales stuff that's going on too in a moment, would be to shed the salary. And so we've been kind of thinking, cart before the horse, I guess, and assuming they're going to bring in some outside guy who costs more than the minimum, in which case you would have to part ways with somebody. Well, if they're not going to bring in anybody from the outside, first of all, I think that's a mistake. But if they're not going to go sign someone for $5 million or $8 million or trade for somebody who's $4 million or $7 million or whatever, well, then, you can just roll back this thing minus Kepler, Santana, Thielbar, and Margot and whoever else is a free agent. and just go in with 100.
Do we really care then whether or not Paddock is on the roster or whether or not they're paying Paddock $8 million or not? Right. Like if they're not going to use the money to bring somebody else in, does it really matter whether or not they're trading somebody
exactly
away?
Right. It doesn't make the team better to shed the salary unless you're using the shed salary to do something.
Right.
And if they're not going to do anything, keep Paddock as your fifth starter. Now, that sucks for David Festa.
Or high latent relief or something like that. We'll see.
It only... salary space, and this is true in any sport, obviously. The NFL and NBA are obviously so much more focused on cap room and all that stuff. But it only matters if you're going to use it. Right. And then to that extent, it only matters if you're going to use it well. So that's the point I've reached. Like at this stage in the offseason, I do still expect them to make some type of move coming or going. I might even bet on both in terms of a major league something.
I think so, too.
I just think the needs are so obvious, and they seemed to agree with them coming into the offseason.
Right.
They didn't seem to dance around the idea, even public, like on quotes and stuff, like not just background off the record, of, we could use a Santana replacement.
Sure.
We could use a right-handed hitting corner outfielder pair with Larnach and Wallner. We could use this. We could use that. They didn't seem to disagree with each of those premises.
No, they didn't also seem to emphasize, we've got to get this taken care of. This is a real thing. The responses both publicly and privately were, there's some things we could do. The big question we had going into the offseason was, given the collapse, right? Do they need to make some fundamental change?
Yes,
to
for
this
change's
team,
sake, almost
for change's sake, just to shake things up here, or are they going to nibble around the edges?
Right.
And the answer is clearly, if there was a way, they certainly didn't find a way to shake things up. And in fact, they haven't really found a way to nibble around the edges. Not even the partial roles of a half of a platoon at first base, or a right-handed hitter, or a left-handed
field bar replacement.
That's right, something like that. We haven't even really seen that.
Right.
So
I do think that the initial, and actually Falvey mentioned this on his very emotional last day of the season thing. He kind of said, I want everybody to be really upset today and tomorrow and maybe even 2 weeks from now. I don't want to hear jokes about it. I don't want to hear we'll be fine. I don't want to hear that. But he did say, as we get deeper into the actual offseason and closer to spring training, beating yourself up about what has already happened does you no good. And the way I take that in terms of what you just said is, I feel like if they were going to make a big move, it would have been
right away
when they were more emotionally exposed. They were more of a raw wire.
That's true. Yeah, I agree.
Now, it doesn't mean they can't make a big move. A lot of their big moves have been around this time of year,
right.
obviously.
Right.
But I feel like if they weren't going to shake up the core in November, December, early January, when they were maybe still a little emotionally charged from how crappy everything ended, now they are sort of might be to the point, and I don't think that's necessarily a mistake from like a projection standpoint, where they might be like, is this team... It's not a bad team. We don't have any gaping holes. I mean, look at some of the, like Zips just came up with their projections for Fangraphs, and Zips has them around 87, 88 wins, all that.
That is true from maybe their perspective. What we have seen is them making moves later in the offseason, in part because from a league perspective, if you are going to go the route of not spending money, which the Twins are, and which a lot of teams actually are kind of in that boat. We're seeing a real stasis of teams, of fan bases that are frustrated with their, supposedly competitive teams kind of sitting on their hands throughout this offseason, right?
Including the rest of the division.
Right, yes.
For the most part.
Exactly, right. Brewers, Mariners, there's just a lot of, wild card or, potential division winning teams that have not gone out of their way to improve themselves this offseason.
Right.
But what you see, the reason you end up seeing moves like the Twins have made late as spring training is that once those free agents are gone and you've got teams left over and they're like, but we don't want to spend a lot of money, but we need a good number two starter.
The trade avenue starts.
Well, then they're like, who's got a good extra number two starter?
Yeah. And
Bailey Ober looks pretty good.
I think that could even apply to like the Paddocks and Vasquez of the world, where they're not anyone's first choice.
Well,
they're not anyone's fifth choice.
Good point. Right.
But if the free agent options dry up a little bit.
Now, if you're looking to shake this team up, that's where your hope lies, is what I'm saying. It's not so much that the Twins themselves are still feeling the need to shake things up, or they're going to react emotionally, or it's more like, because the rest of the league is also looking to figure out what the hell they're going to get done before spring training.
I think like the version of what you're talking about would be like the Lopez Arise trade.
Yeah. And that, by the way, happened January 20th.
Right.
That's right. So, that does, which is 3 days still in the future, so.
Yeah, I think that's right. But if you're not going to bring in anything, you don't need to shed the salary. You don't have to shed Vasquez, because if you're not, but here's what I wonder, and maybe this is, the front office would probably be annoyed if I were in the room and said this, but if you're at least putting forth the idea publicly that you could begin the season as is, I don't mean from a talent standpoint, but from a payroll standpoint, where they're closer to 140 than 130.
Right.
If I'm to take that as real, which I'm skeptical about that, because there's messaging involved. They don't want the other 29 teams to know they're desperate to shed salary.
Of course.
But let's take that at face value, that they could start the season with a $140 million payroll. That's good. Great. That to me almost makes it, if that's true, if you've gotten approval that you could start with a $140 million payroll, that makes me more motivated to trade Vasquez and Paddock, at which point you would have $20 million to spend.
Right.
Or more.
Maybe 10, but right? Depending on how much salary you could.
You're at 140 now. You shed both of them. That's $17 million.
Right.
You got $15 million. Well, you could actually go out and sign somebody pretty decent for $15 million at this point, or go trade for somebody. I suspect, though, the reality is either they can't really start the season at 140, or if you were to tell ownership, hey, you told us we can start the season at 140, we went ahead and traded Vasquez and Paddock, so now we're at 120.
Yeah.
But so we got $20 million to spend. Right. I suspect ownership would go, actually, now that you're at 120, let's set it at 125. So go on and sign, somebody for $5 million. That's kind of how
Canna's still available, right? How about him?
Mark Canna has been the most mentioned. He has taken the place of Adam Duvall and Tommy Pham as our random right-handed hitting corner outfielder that we mentioned 400 times per year. So we're going to talk sales stuff. We're going to talk about the TV situation, because there's been some new info on that.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to break down
literally over the last 48 hours.
Yes.
So it's the Patreon episode.
I've done a lot of reporting on that front, by which I mean I texted the few people who will text me back. But first, before we get into all this,
let's talk about our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. You will be able to taste Black Stack Brewing at the Winter Meltdown.
Yes, they're the beer provider at the Winter Meltdown.
We are going to get a couple kegs of their local 755. We're going to get a couple kegs of their Slopes French Pilsner.
What will the rest of the people drink after you finish those 4 kegs, John?
That is correct.
That's my question.
You'll be getting a pint glass with the Black Stack Brewing logo on it as well. We unveiled the design for the pint glass today. But you can also taste them at other places, because now they're being distributed all over greater Minnesota. Like, you can find them at your local liquor store, and that's a new thing, because it used to be basically there's maybe a half a dozen or a dozen liquor stores in the Twin Cities area that
kind of
specialize in craft beers or something. That's the only places you could get them before. Now you can get them just about everywhere. So I would encourage you to go look out there. I will tell you, the local 755. If you like New England IPA, I know that's a favorite, not just of mine, but also of other beat writers that we have here, or other IPA aficionados. They're known for their beer. Some breweries are not known for, they might be known for their location or their environment or their activities. They're known for their beer, so check them out, especially by checking out at your local liquor store. Stop by their Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280, which is, by the way, a great tap room. Or even easier, just ask them at your local liquor store.
Our next sponsor is Harry's Razors, longtime sponsor of ours.
Long time. I was thinking about this today. I bet you it's been 12 years.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you... I wonder how many of our listeners are already Harry. If you're not, if you're not, you're not a early adapter.
No, but that's okay. I'm usually not that either.
That's true.
And we can speak from experience, because they will, when they come out with a new offering,
right,
they often will send us a sample.
Right.
And I can tell you, over the 10 years or whatever that they've been a sponsor, not only it was always good quality, but now they've really sort of honed in on how they do this manufacturing. They've cut out the middleman. It's a less expensive product that is as good, or I will say very often superior to the product that you have to go to a store and ask someone to unlock a case, and then your razor's worn down, but you don't feel like going to get a new one, so you just keep shaving with a bad razor. This is easy.
Absolutely been an evolution on that. In fact, I would say to the enormous razor companies that existed prior to Harry's, a revolution to those poor suckers. Right?
You can get it delivered directly to your door. You can pause it if you don't need new ones.
It's half the price of what you're going to get at the store. It's in a great little trial set. It's a great little packaging.
Yeah, you can get the trial set, which has a 5-blade razor with a weighted handle. You get the foaming shave gel with it, and it also comes with a travel cover. It'll cost you just $3 with this special offer. You go to harrys.com/Gleeman. That's HARRYS.com/Gleeman. You can get started with the $13 value trial set for just $3. That's harrys.com/Gleeman. I noticed, now that the sponsors are over. Shave? Yeah. Well, we always do a face rub, right? Face together.
Check out this chin.
Yeah. I don't know that I've really ever seen facial hair on John in 20 years of knowing him, but not intentional facial hair. Maybe just the odd random.
That's because of Harry's does such a good job, Cleveland.
Or your genetics. One of those two. I noticed how you said it's a favorite of other beat writers, too. You corrected yourself because you're not really a beat writer. A few days ago at my home, we were watching something, and I jokingly said, other handsome guys like to wear that too or something. And she went, other handsome guys? And I was like, that's right. In the handsome guy community.
Sure. It's just of which I am a proud card-carrying member.
She was like, okay, it's nice you think that. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the sale of the team stuff, because there's been some new reports certainly on that. So Dan Hayes of a little upstart called The Athletic reported last week that there were substantial interest from multiple parties and that there was growing optimism that a new owner could be chosen, I think is how he worded it, by or around opening day. And that's significant because opening day at this point is 3 months from now.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, right.
And then Lavelle of the Strib, the Minnesota Star Tribune, had an article yesterday or the day before, I want to say? Yesterday. Covering some of the same ground. He suggested maybe more May-ish or June-ish. But he also mentioned, it might sort of semantic because he reported a lot of the same stuff that Dan did. But he phrased it more as they could decide on who they want to sell to around opening day.
We might know who the buyer is by opening day.
And then the actual process, the end, the goal line, punching it into the end zone could take an extra month or two, which that all seems logical to me. I think that
he also suggested there's more than 10 potential buyers.
Well, we talked on the Patreon, and I'm getting my info from Dan a lot. Right. He wrote about it. I talked to a few people about it, but this isn't my alley really. The idea that there are, I said, it's closer to 1 than 10 in terms of suitors,
right? And
I know Lavelle said there's up to 10. But what he phrased it as, there's been, I think, 10 people to express interest.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay, well. Yeah. we've expressed interest.
I'll put it this way.
We've opened it up to our Patreon subscribers. Anybody wants to partner with us, we're in. Yeah.
There were, I think, they reported 20 teams expressed interest in Roki Sasaki, including the Twins.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Well, I don't mean they were in the mix beside Roki Sasaki.
No, that's right, yeah.
So, it's semantic. When you get reports like this, especially about a thing where the people involved are not incentivized to leak information and stuff like that.
Or they are incentivized to leak specific information.
Sure.
Hey, we've got all kinds of suitors.
You got to kind of true. You got to kind of parse the info. But I think generally both reports and the little I've gleaned from people, it kind of all points the same direction. And it's not all just coming from the Twins. I'll say that. So, they have genuine interest from people with the means to buy this thing, which is the first step, obviously. I would go a step further and say there's enough genuine interest from enough rich people to make me think they fully plan to sell the thing, which you and I were kind of on the same page in believing that was true from the start.
In fact, I think we were on the page of they might be motivated sellers. Like this isn't just they're exploring or they're interested. This is we need to get some money.
There was skepticism at the beginning when they made the announcement in November or whatever it was. Like, is this just a way to kind of get the heat off them, and then they're going to come back in a year and go, well, we're going to keep it or whatever. Right. I now do genuinely believe they're going to sell. I always believed that, but I think it's really true now. And then the only real information that's kind of changing in the scope of this thing is the idea that it's going to be sooner than later. The idea that this thing is progressing at a strong enough pace that people are actually looking at an end game here, as opposed to, we could see it happening during the summer. We could see it happen before 2026, something like that. Right. Once you start saying to people who are going to report this on either side, or there's multiple sides, and, Dan reported on the Ishbia as being a potential suitor and some other stuff. Once you start saying, well, this could get done by X date, or we could be, closer to the end than the beginning of this thing, then that tells me like they're starting to do some of the background info. They're starting to do, from the potential buyer standpoint, the sort of forensic accounting that's going to have to happen behind the scenes. And that tells me the wheels are in motion, I guess is what I'm...
My biggest doubt about this sale was, are they going to get the number they expect? Right, we've seen enough Major League Baseball teams go on the market and then be pulled back off the market. Whether they were kind of how serious the seller was, you never really know, right? But there's been enough of that kind of back and forth amongst Major League Baseball teams that you're kind of like, I don't know how much. I don't know if the valuation that we're getting from Forbes or we're getting from various
those are just estimates.
Those are estimates, and are they really going to be like? Is that what is in the Pohlads' mind? Is that what is in Ishbia's mind?
We can sit here and say, "Hey, Forbes says they're worth 1.5 billion," but that matters not at all if the Pohlads say we want 2.5 billion.
That is correct. So that is the
and we don't know what they're asking.
We don't know. We don't have any idea what the sale price will be, etc. But my point is, like, if it's gotten to the point where everybody's like, I think we're going to have this wrapped, pretty much figured out, and like we'll have to by opening day we'll have to cross the T's and dot the I's and stuff after that point, right? But at that point, when people are talking about it like that, everybody has a number in mind.
Well, or at least people's initial sort of volley has been close enough to the range that they have in mind.
Correct.
For them to go, all right.
Yes.
I mean, look, anybody who's been in a fantasy football league, if someone sends you a trade offer, and you look at it and you go, get out of here with that trade offer. You delete it. You don't even reply to it. Right. But if someone sends you a trade offer and you go, all right, actually, let's talk, because this is within the realm of possibility. Right. And this is obviously not... It's not nearly as important as a fantasy football trade, but it's up there. But I think, I agree that I think they've reached the point where they're not being offered $800 million. You know what I mean? That's right. So we'll see. I think in terms of, here's the reality.
Or they're not expecting $1.9 million or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, whatever it is, they seem to be all kind of on the same page.
See, I suspect at this level of wealth that most of this kind of negotiating or back and forth that has probably gone on so far has not necessarily been focused on a specific number. Because I don't know that $100 million necessarily is sort of the sticking point to this stuff. I think the overall state of what is being purchased is the sticking point. In other words, if you're the Ishbia brothers, does it matter to you if it matters more to determine, do I actually want this thing?
Well, sure.
Than it does, do I want to pay $1.5 billion or $1.7 billion for this thing? And so I think that's probably part of it, but certainly you would want to at least have a general understanding.
Whatever you would think that I use the price as an obstacle, because my point is there's probably several little obstacles like that. Whatever the big obstacles were in people's minds, it feels like they are not big obstacles. You know what I mean? Whether in my mind that was going to be price. Now in Ishbia's mind, it might have been state of the organization or long term, or what the lease situation is with target field. Like I don't know exactly what they
dig further in the television market. All that stuff.
Whatever is kind of in the way in people's minds on the sale doesn't seem to be such a big the obstacles don't seem to be big enough, whether it's price or whatever, that is going to keep it from happening.
Here's my bad analogy. If you need a new couch and you go into CB2, CB2.
I don't know. Oh, Crate Barrel 2. Got it. Yeah.
Is that it? I don't know.
Yes,
it's expensive.
That's what the
I've been in there. I left crying.
It's the old Crate Barrel. Yeah, it's the second generation.
If you walk into that store, you're doing so understanding you're going to spend a bunch of money on a couch.
Fair.
So the specific dollar amount isn't as important as sitting on the couch and liking the couch. You already know you're going to spend an S-load on this couch.
That's fair.
And so I think if you're walking in metaphorically to Target Field to buy the Twins, it doesn't matter that much, and this is very easy for me to say with $1,100 in my savings account or whatever. It doesn't matter that much if it's $1.57 billion or $1.68 billion or whatever it is. That matters ultimately, but what matters is, do you like sitting on the couch?
Right.
Do you think it's going to fit in your living room? And so I suspect that's sort of what's going on now.
Maybe.
But either way, the one thing I wanted to kind of caution on it is, you said hope they get the price they want, and I get that because it's like if they don't get the price they want, they're not going to sell. So yes, you hope they get the price they want because we want them to sell at this point.
Right.
But it's one of those things where it's like if you're a star player and you're requesting a trade to another team in any sport, even talking about NBA, you don't want the team trading you to make that good of a trade. Because then you're going to the other team and they've traded away too much to the other team.
That's fair. Yeah.
Realistically, if the Ishbia brothers are going to buy this thing, let's say, I'd rather they buy it for $1.3 billion than $2.3 billion because maybe they got some more money to throw around.
Yeah, that's right.
But anyway, the final thing on this, and then we'll move on to, we're going to talk TV stuff too, which is sort of related, I suppose. The thing I would caution is whether you...
that might have been one of the obstacles we're talking about here.
I mean, that's a big... Right. Whoever owns this team, a huge percentage of the revenue for this team is going to come from broadcast, local, quote unquote, television broadcasts,
right.
And that is such influx now that it's the spectrum of what you could expect revenue wise over the next 30 years from that is so wide.
Right.
But so the last thing I would say on this topic is whether it's realistic that this thing could get mostly done by opening day, or even May or June, it's not going to get done by, February 15th. And that's what it would take for them to actually have an impact on the opening day roster in terms of investment or even just aggressiveness of the front office. Like, I do believe that whoever buys this thing is going to want to come in and open up the wallet initially and say, let's try to improve this team. Let's try to get aggressive. Let's try to do, you see this a lot.
Right.
But I think that's, in the Twins case, that's pretty unrealistic for opening day. The thing that you would want to kind of focus on if you're a fan and you want some reason for optimism on that front is the trade deadline.
Yeah.
Is, by the time new owners take over, it'll either be the season's already started or there isn't going to be much to sign as is.
Correct.
But if they take over in May or June and the team is in first place or is within shouting distance of a wild card spot even, it would be very easy, and by the way, a great way to engender some early love from the fan base that is going to be so willing to embrace the new owner anyway.
Yes.
To say...
looking to love you. Right.
To say, well, we've told Derek in the front office, Jeremy in the front office, be aggressive at the deadline. Right. We're going to beef this thing up. We're going to make a playoff run right away.
Right.
And so I think that would be more realistic, which that's fine too. The only thing that relies on is the team not crap in the bed in April, May, and June, which we'll see. I mean, when you crap the bed in August and September, that there's some doubt about that.
I was asked last night, a friend of mine who's a casual Twins fan asked me, so give me the 3 stories about the Twins that you're give me what are the 3 big things I need to know kind of going into spring training. I said, well, the 3 stories are 1, team's up for sale, who's going to buy him, right? 2, they did nothing this offseason and are probably not doing anything significant this offseason. And how is that? And the third is they're coming off of a collapse where they were 9-29, and are they going to start the season 9-29? Are we going to see a continuation of that collapse, or is there going to be something else. And that kind of gets to your last point, that last one, which is sort of how much faith do we have that they're going to stick around, that they're going to be competitive in April, May, and June, considering the last taste that was in our mouth as the season ended was absolutely vomit-inducing.
Right? Last taste was vomit.
Right. So
yeah,
I will be interested
what
to
I'll
see.
say on that front is, like, especially as we get closer to spring training, you'll hear us talk about over-under totals for the Twins and the rest of the Central, or odds to win the Central, or Fangraphs projections, win totals. Like I said, Zips, which is my favorite projection system from Dan Zimborski, who was my first editor 20-something years ago, has them at like 87, 88 wins. And that's not unreasonable to me.
Right.
The problem, though, gets to what you were just saying, which is, if they were just a run-of-the-mill 82-win team, which is what they did last year, they won 82 and 80.
Right.
If you're just a run-of-the-mill 500 team, it wouldn't be unreasonable to roll it back for the most part. It wouldn't be unreasonable to say, all right, we finished 500. We think we can be 7 games better this year and compete and all that. And it also wouldn't be unreasonable for a 500 team, just a run-of-the-mill 500 team, to be projected to win 87 or 88 and be co-favorites in the division or whatever, which I suspect they will probably, some gambling lines will put them near that. But the problem is they weren't a run-of-the-mill 82 and 80 team.
Right.
They were never at any point a 500 team for more than a week or two at a time.
Yeah.
They were either a 90-something win team or a 50-something win team.
They were terrible in April. They were terrible in August and September, and they were really good in between. Right.
And so
what are they? Yeah, we don't know.
Right, we don't know. Like, it wouldn't shock me. I think the most likely scenario is they're just okay. They're decent. They're above average, but not great. And that's what the projection systems say. But it also wouldn't shock me if they came out and they were legitimately good right away, because we saw that for long stretches, months-long stretches last year.
Or if they were legitimately terrible right away.
In which case, if they're legitimately...
They've had a lot of slow starts underneath Baldelli.
True. Yeah, hitting especially has been abysmal a lot of times in the cold weather. Somewhat related to the sale, I suppose, as a main topic, is the television situation.
Yep.
So let's touch on that. So they announced yesterday. It wasn't much of an announcement as far as announcements go. It was almost noteworthy for what it didn't announce as much as what it did announce. So they tweeted out and put all over social, and I guess on the twins.com or whatever, the 2025 on-air broadcast lineup in terms of the talent. And what was noteworthy about that is very few changes, all the names you saw last year. And noteworthy there is, they're not on traditional television anymore. Like they're not.
The most noteworthy thing wasn't the names that were on it. The most noteworthy thing is that they've got their own TV network now.
Sure. What I mean is the fact that Audra Martin, for example, is returning.
Yes.
Was very much in doubt. Not because she didn't want to return.
Because she works for FanDuel Sports
Network. For 2 reasons.
Right.
One is we weren't certain because they're not a traditional television production anymore.
Sure.
They're going to be on satellite and cable as a sort of standalone entity channel that they'll get. But I've seen with some other teams, I think Padres or whatever, the channel basically goes live 3 minutes before the first pitch and goes dead 3 minutes after the first pitch for some of these teams that have taken this direction with their broadcast. They're streaming mostly, but it can be a television channel, quote unquote, when the game is going on. Right. Well, they don't necessarily, under that scenario, have to have a pregame show or a postgame show. They don't even necessarily have to have a sideline reporter or a in-game element.
Those are all additional expenses, and you're not really making as much on advertising as you are during the game anyway for that stuff.
So it was good news in that sense, not only for Audra personally, who Audra's a super nice person, one of my favorite people I've met doing this job.
She's awesome.
And she loves doing the job, and she wanted to continue doing the job, and she does a good job. But the second point was, even if they were going and are going to have pre and post game and sort of business as usual from a production standpoint, I mean, I'm sure there will be some cutbacks relative to the traditional TV product. The problem was she does Wild also, similar role. Right. And the Wild, it was fine when both the Wild and the Twins were on Bally Sports because she could just work for Bally Sports. But now the Twins are not on Bally, or now FanDuel as it's called. And so there was some worry. I was worried. I know she was worried too, that the Wild would say, well, we can't let you do Twins because
Or the network would say, you're going to work for a competing sports network?
So I think it's
And
good
us?
news.
I don't think so.
Right. That she can do both. So that's going to be business as usual for the most part. Katie Storm is back as pregame, postgame host. Tim Laudner is back as the primary, analyst for pre and postgame. That you have Corey Provis, obviously, as the play-by-play. Justin Morneau as the primary analyst. And then you have the quartet of sort of secondary analysts, which is LaTroy Hawkins,
Right.
Glenn Perkins, who I'm guessing is also going to do some radio, probably. That's what he did last year. Trevor Plouffe, and Denard Spann. Missing from that group is Roy Smalley, who I think has done sort of secondary analyst, 15, 20 games a year for 20 years.
Right.
I mean, as long as I can remember.
Right.
And he announced his retirement from broadcasting
The day before
about
this.
24 hours before this,
that's right.
which was always obviously tied to this. It wouldn't shock me if that was related to them saying, we got to get down to X number in terms of head count here.
Maybe.
From a cost standpoint or from a whatever standpoint. But also I suspect Smalley, he mentioned in his retirement that his wife is
basically saying
telling him,
it's time to,
you're ready to call it quits at this
That's
point.
right.
I'll say here what I've said before, but I vote for Roy Smalley for the Twins Hall of Fame every year that he's on the ballot. I think he is by far the most deserving player who is not yet in, particularly given that he retired 40 years ago or whatever, or 30 years ago. So it's not like a recency thing. To me, I think he's a deserving Twins Hall of Famer. He is until Correa overtakes him. I believe Smalley is the best shortstop in the history of the Twins. I know people say Gagne because he won the two World Series, but that was more because he was on the great teams. But whatever. If you add in announcing for 20 years, that's a no-brainer.
Right.
It's like, to me, it was always funny, like Joe Torre as a third baseman was like a borderline Hall of Famer, and then he was like the most successful manager for 20 years.
Right.
I was like, well, how is this guy not an inner circle Hall of Famer?
That's right.
It's not quite at that level. But anyway, that's what I'll say about
I'll say this about Smalley, too. I enjoyed his analysis.
I did, too.
I mean, I think he was doing real hitting analysis even before the Twins were doing real hitting analysis.
Yes.
Now, these days, I'm not sure if his hitting analysis is necessarily appreciated as much as it was maybe 15 years ago, because a lot of people are doing hitting analysis. Justin Moore does hitting analysis. Like Corey Provis talks naturally about it. Dick Bramer was talking about it.
But in 2010,
But he was doing it in 2010, 2004, 2005.
When Bert was just talking about every bad pitch, well, he left it up. He left it up. You can't leave it up.
That's right.
It was a real stark contrast of like Roy Smalley actually trying to break down hitting mentality and mechanics and all that stuff. So I give Roy Smalley all sorts of credit.
I agree.
Great dresser. This is what
he was
learned,
ahead of his time.
Seeing him behind the scenes and getting to know him a little bit.
Fantastic hair.
Amazing hair. Always immaculately dressed, much like me.
Yes, yeah.
And
real Southern California vibe about Mr. Smalley.
Yeah, but like
yeah.
He dresses like a hedge fund manager.
That's right,
like
that's
a cool
right.
hedge fund manager.
That's right.
And I'll say this.
Which I think he's a financial advisor.
He is.
So that was,
Russo told me he's his financial advisor.
Okay.
And I'm like, boy, so he deals with like billions, huh? Like that. But also, super nice guy.
Yeah.
Even to a schmuck like me.
Yeah, that's right.
Like willing to. I had a really good conversation with him a year ago about Jose Miranda as a third baseman. And he started talking about his experience trying to change positions and learning how to throw from a different angle. And I was like, this should have been a podcast. And I thought, he just spent 20 minutes BSing with me about this.
He would be a good guy to have at the Meltdown. He's not one of our guests this year. I'll tell you that, folks. We've got three good guests, a really good trio of guests.
So on the television front, they said in the announcement, what they did announce was the lineup of people that we just discussed. They also said, and I'll read this so I don't misquote it. In addition to MLB's direct-to-consumer streaming option, the Twins said that their broadcasts are also, quote, scheduled to be available on television via cable, satellite, and multi-channel video providers. So that's what we just mentioned.
Perfect.
If you have DirecTV, for instance, they're confident that they're going to negotiate like their own kind of standalone channel, which means, at 6:59, If you want to watch the Twins at 7, you put on channel 842 or whatever it is.
There's going to be some channel that's going to be freed up to just be the Twins games. Right.
So they seem relatively confident, and they were the whole time, I would say, that they're going to be able to work something out with Comcast and DirecTV and all this stuff so that it'll be available that way. And honestly, for a lot of people, other than just having to rethink of what channel you want to dial in, it's not going to be that different than it was previously. But here was the other part of the announcement. I thought it was noteworthy that they didn't actually roll out the product yet. They linked twins.tv.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which is going to be the URL where you'll kind of want to go if you're going to stream it with your laptop or whatever. Right. But you click on twins.tv and it just sends you to MLB.tv.
Okay.
They haven't actually rolled out the product yet with the full details, pricing, for instance, and all that stuff. And why that's noteworthy to me is they're going to want people to actually sign up for it. And the longer you wait for that,
Twins Fest would seem to be a pretty good time.
Which is a week from now.
Yeah, right. Which is literally next week, right?
Or they're waiting for a move to happen.
I mean, often
so
when
people aren't so annoyed with
often they would announce this stuff the week of Twins Fest, right? We at the very least we get on the Twins luncheon, which is a week from today, right? Literally a week from today.
I mean, if they don't announce it, they're going to get questions about that.
The media luncheon.
And when I say they're going to get questions, I'm going to ask a question about it.
When can we sign up for TV?
Right. Like, what are you just? When are we
or streaming?
This thing
right.
out?
That's right. Well, I mean, they do have a fair amount going on over there right now.
Yeah,
they've got their president retired. Yeah,
this would seem to
you
be
would think this would be a priority. You're right.
And so we were speculating on the Patreon because the Brewers and the Reds initially had announced they were taking the same path as the Twins, which is detaching themselves from the traditional TV setup, going to direct to consumer with these channels that you can set up on other places. But they backtracked from that last week and went back to their original signed 1-year deal with FanDuel Sports or whatever. And so we had speculated a few days ago, well, the Twins haven't announced the damn thing. Maybe they're thinking about doing that.
Right.
This would seem to put an end to that.
I would think so.
This is as close as you can be to committing to actually going forward with the change, other than actually rolling it out and starting to get signups. Because obviously once you're starting to get signups, once people are putting money into that, there's no going back from that. So I suspect this kind of rules that out, which I think is probably a good thing. I think ripping that Band-Aid off is probably a positive. So that's the TV front. I think that's all fairly good news. It's not good news if you enjoyed hearing Roy Smalley 15 times a year. And he'll be missed. But I think they do have a very good group of rotating analysts. I think all of the 5 total people, including Morneau, do a good job. And I also like the idea that they're recently retired players. I think that is a huge key.
Right.
I think that became a real negative with Blyleven in that he just had shut his brain off completely to anything that happened in the last 30 years. Yeah. And I think, guys like Plouffe and Span, they were playing 5 years ago.
Yeah,
like this is, and even Morneau and even LaTroy. I think it's a good mix not only of position players and pitchers. I think it's a good mix of guys who are able to do the actual analysis and talk about new things, but also guys who have pretty decent senses of humor and stuff. So I think I've been happy with the bunch.
I also just like the fact that it's a mix.
I like that too.
You know what I mean? That is one thing that keeps it fresh, the fact that you've got different voices on there all the time. It is an absolute grind for 162 games.
I know for a fact that Morneau ain't interested in doing 140 games.
I mean, that is an absolute grind. Having a rotating group like that so that you can jump into this, really get to know this series and really get to know that series. Yeah. Plouffe can handle the West Coast stuff.
That's right.
Denard Span can handle some of the Tampa Bay stuff or whatever.
Right. It works out well. Yeah. LaTroy can handle all his former teams, which is like 3/4 of the league.
132 of the games. So
I think that's a positive on the television front. Nothing unexpected necessarily, but I think the real final step of that thing is people have to be able to sign up for it. So I guess I would be marginally surprised if that isn't coming next week at Twins Fest. I think it would be a real missed opportunity for them.
Yes.
I would want that door open as long as possible.
Correct.
So people can get comfortable with it, read about it, experience it, go to the website, set it up on their phone, all this stuff. So until they do that, let's talk about our next couple of sponsors here.
Yeah, daily fantasy games that you can play in Minnesota, win some cash with Prize Picks. You just download the Prize Picks app and you're going to be able to watch some of the games and have a little interest in exactly what is going on in those games. You just sign up today and you're going to get $50 off when you play $5. You don't even need to receive. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 guarantee. All you have to do is bet $5 on it. And that's because Prize Picks is, you could play it here in Minnesota. You can go do what I did, which is, build a lineup of, results you think is going to happen on individual players. I particularly this week was interested in the fact that I didn't think the Eagles looked very good versus the Packers last week. As we watched that game together, kind of via our text things, and as a result of that, I don't think Jalen Hurts is quite right after his return. So there was a fantasy question about whether or not he was going to get 220 yards passing in that game, and I think he's going to be less than that. And then I took a look at some of the other quarterbacks, and so I built a lineup of 3 players where I think 2 of them win, I win some money, and if all 3 of them end up doing it, I win even more money.
Yeah, NFL playoff time, like you said, so don't miss out last few weeks of the football action with Prize Picks. Best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money.
Right.
And, it's super easy, fun to play.
Yeah. And
download the app today. Prize Picks app. Use the code Gleeman, Gleeman, and you get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next sponsor is Factor, which here's how Factor works. It's super easy, just heated and eat meals delivered direct to your door, and the kicker to it is
it's healthy.
Yeah. But healthy in a way that you can choose what type of healthy.
Yep.
For instance,
I had protein.
There's protein heavy.
Yep, that's what
there's
I did.
Vegetarian.
Yep.
There's different diets, keto, whatever.
We had it delivered the day after we got back from Australia. And I will tell you, as we were trying to run around and get our lives back together, last night I was going out with a friend. I wanted to have something to eat before I went out having a couple beers with a friend. Chrissy was going to be left home alone. We didn't want to have to leave the house. We didn't want to get delivered. We wanted to eat well. Yeah. And it takes 2 minutes.
Just pop them in the microwave.
It takes 2 minutes, and it's good.
Yes.
Their butter chicken is unbelievable. They've got...
we both sampled it.
Oh, my God. It's fantastic.
Eat smart with Factor. You can get started at factormeals.com/Gleeman50off. Gleeman50 off.
50 off.
Right. 50 off. And the reason for that is because you get 50% off your first box, and they will ship it to you for free. That's code Gleeman50 off. Gleeman50 off.
Right.
At Factor Meals, Factor Meals, factormeals.com/Gleeman50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first order.
You will not regret those.
Let's
where you might regret, the late night run to Taco Bell.
That's pretty much. You want to know something? I almost had Taco Bell last night.
I know.
And I thought.
But you had that Factor meal handy.
Yeah.
Hit yourself a healthy tasty meal in 2 minutes.
So, all right, we've talked about the sale. We've talked about the TV situation. We talked a little bit about Zoll's quotes. We talked a lot about that and sort of how to parse that information on the Patreon side. So we won't necessarily go that deep into it. The Patreon's a lot about deeper dives on stuff that we maybe spend 5 minutes on here. You spend a little more time in some options.
As well as a mailbag with all kinds of random questions and tangents and stuff.
I really
it was really
enjoyed
fun.
the mailbag.
That was fun.
Here's what I'll say about the mailbag. John and I were not in a good mood to start the podcast because
we basically yelled at each other for 30 minutes before.
We saw each other for the first time in a month, and within 30 seconds, I'm screaming at him. And John's like, no, you know what? You can't say that. And then we're like, let's just record. And the mailbag questions were so good and amusing
That's right.
and interesting that within 20 minutes, we were laughing and joking, and
That's right.
John didn't even punch me as I left.
It was good.
Still waiting for that.
Right.
Yeah. But the one...
Sleep tight.
Yeah. Honestly, the way I am at physically, you're doing me a favor. I'm like a horse who broke his leg. The one interesting, I guess, development of late on the payroll front, which we went over, the whole 130, 140, all that stuff, is they agreed to 1-year deals... I lose sight of days, but within the last week with their remaining arbitration eligible players.
Right.
So at the beginning of the offseason, they had 12 arbitration eligible players. One of them, Alex Kirilloff, retired because he has the exact same spinal injury that I have, which I would like to retire too, but I can't because I didn't get a $3 million signing bonus out of high school. I had to pay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
do
that's
stuff
true.
initially.
You couldn't even get hired by the Minnesota Daily.
No, I'm still application. They tell me it's on file if we ever need it. Yeah. And so that left 11 arbitration eligible players. They agreed last month or even a month and a half ago to 1-year deals with 3 relievers, which was Tonkin, Topa, and Stewart, all around $1 million bucks to avoid arbitration with them. So that left 8 unsolved arbitration eligible guys. They agreed the other day, right at the deadline day, league-wide, to 1-year deals with the remaining 8 players, which means they will not have any arbitration hearings. The benefit of that, and we've talked about this before, we actually had Daniel Adler on several years ago when he first was with the Twins, who's now an assistant GM, talking about the arbitration setup a little bit. I have some weird experience with that. It was really the first paid thing I ever did right out of college.
That's what you got the $3 million signing bonus for?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it was I honestly think it was $9 an hour or something like that. We had to bill them like we were lawyers.
Good. That was solid money back then.
This was 20 years ago.
Right.
I don't know if I ever. I guess maybe I said the team, but anyway, I prepared the presentation materials for a team going against a player in arbitration back then, stats and stuff. The real downside to that, and I've talked to players who have gone through arbitration cases, is if you get to the point where you can't come to a avoidance agreement and you actually go through with a hearing, which teams desperately try to avoid, the hearing is really, you're not denigrating the player, but you're making a case that the player is not worth what they're asking.
Right.
And so almost by definition, that's going to be bringing up facts and statistics and analysis that paint the player in a negative light.
Right.
And
whereas you're trying to encourage them the rest of their time, trying to work with them, etc.
And I've talked to players who come out of an arbitration hearing and they're like, boy, they think I'm a real pile of junk. What?
Right.
Why am I even on the team? They were trying to act like I shouldn't even be in the majors or anything. And so if nothing else, it's worth avoiding having to sit in the same room and put a slideshow up about how this pitcher isn't as good as his ERA suggests.
I remember one of the first things that happened when Falvey took over the front office from Terry Ryan is that the Twins had a reputation of avoiding arbitration at all costs.
Right.
And
one of
the first things they did was, Kyle Loesch was 2004.
Right. No, they'd often gone 5 years in between cases.
Maybe longer than that.
Yeah.
And one of the first things they did is go to arbitration with Kyle Gibson.
Correct.
And I am convinced they chose Kyle Gibson to go to arbitration with because Kyle Gibson is a level-headed guy that isn't going to take things personally on this. And they wanted to send a message to the players and agents. Yes, we will go to arbitration. We will do this. Also, we've got new people in these positions. We want them to go through arbitration. We want them to know what it's like. Yeah, that's right. And so they went through that. And they also Kyle Gibson was also sort of a there was a clear-cut comp for Kyle Gibson. There was another player that had a very similar career. I forget who it was. I think it was
But if I remember so the way arbitration works is the player submits, if you don't come to an agreement,
right,
like the Twins have.
Yes.
What happens is after that cutoff date, the players submit a number,
right,
and the team submits a number.
Right.
And oftentimes, even after that, teams, they'll just meet in the middle.
Right.
But some teams set a hard and fast rule. It's called trial and file, or file and trial.
Right.
Which is, if we get to the point that we're filing numbers, we're going to trial.
Right.
So it's a way to put pressure on to come to an agreement. So with a great player,
and I think with Kyle Gibson, both numbers were fairly close.
Right.
And they still didn't. They still went to trial just to do it.
With a great player, let's say a player, third-year arbitration, they're an all-star level guy. They submit at $18 million, and the team submits at $15 million. That's sort of a common.
Sure.
So that's a relatively big gap. Even meeting in the middle represents $1 million here or there. It's probably worth going through a hearing at that point. Whatever. But for let's say Brock Stewart, who agreed to a deal, but Brock Stewart's projection, because he's been injured so much, was $900,000,
right,
or $1 million. Well, the league minimum was like 750,000.
Right.
So like you're going to go to trial over 80,000 or 90,000.
Right.
And you're right. I don't know the exact figure. We can look this up.
Remember, yeah.
But the difference in the two numbers being filed, the team side and the player side for Kyle Gibson, was like $300,000.
Yeah, I think it was 300,000 over or under sort of the midpoint on what everybody kind of agreed, what the other guy had made.
So look, I'm not here to tell you 300,000 is chump change. Obviously, I would do a lot of things, including going through arbitration.
Sure.
I would let you say a lot of mean things to me. I mean, you let me do that
already.
for free.
I was going to say we both do that to each other for
but
5 sponsors.
When the actual salary is $7 million,
that's right.
It's like okay. But so fortunately, getting back to what actually happened.
I mean, you and I will say mean things to each other just to kill time.
Yeah,
for no money whatsoever.
It's a really ugly sweater you're wearing, John. You want to talk about it for 5 minutes? It's a lovely sweater. I don't mean
it's a
that.
kick-ass sweater.
It's all right.
I already got one compliment on this sweater before I even saw you this morning.
Yeah, but you told me that was from Stevie Wonder. Was his name? Is that? Would you call that cable knit? Is that a cable knit
I have no
sweater?
idea. I don't know knitting.
It's blue. I can
It's
tell
blue.
you.
That's what
So the
I call
Twins
it.
have agreed.
I call it the other blue sweater.
All right, shut up. With all 11 of their arbitration eligible guys, so they won't be going to any trials. The relevant part of this is that compared to MLB Trade Rumors does projected salaries for like the 200 arbitration eligible guys. There's a ton of them. It's like a handful at least per team. So they have a system that because it's really just based on service time, age, position, and numbers. And when I say numbers, these are old school numbers. When I was preparing it, they told me saves, ERA, wins for pitchers.
Right.
They told me batting average, homers, and RBIs for hitters. And it's my understanding that hasn't changed that much because the people you're presenting to, the arbitrators or the
arbitrator, yep.
He's not a baseball fan.
Right.
They're just someone who does arbitration in
Right.
all walks of life.
That's right.
So you can't say to them, hey,
they might do it for baseball this time, and they might do it for a factory floor worker next time.
So you can't say to them,
yeah.
hey, this guy's exit velocity suggests that his expected bat. The guy would be like, what are you even talking about? Instead, you got to go, oh, you had a lot of saves. So
That's it.
So MLB Trade Rumors does projections, and they're pretty accurate. They're good. I always cite them. Those 11 guys were projected at around $34 million in total arbitration figures. The Twins ended up signing all 11 of them for $2.4 million less than their projection. Now, that's like 7% or whatever.
Yeah.
That's within the realm of
the back of the napkin level of error on this.
But it seems $2.4 million is not a lot in baseball terms, but it is a lot for a team that is at their spending limit, basically.
Yes.
And so $2.4 million could be enough to bring in a platoon outfielder or a middle reliever or a whatever, who knows, or it could just be enough
it could be enough to put in your back pocket and
paint the third yacht or whatever on your way out the door for the Pohlads. So yeah, that's the takeaway from that. Let's talk a little bit about Diego Cartaya, who they brought into the organization. I would maybe say he's the highest profile addition they've made this offseason. Yeah. That ain't saying much. It's like John's the handsomest podcast.
He was a lot more, he would have been a lot higher profile 2 years ago.
Right. Well, yeah, it's leftover profile from 2 years ago.
Right, yeah.
So just to give you some background on Diego Cartaya, he's a 23-year-old catcher prospect. They got him from the Los Angeles Dodgers in a move.
And a prospect that made it as far as AAA last year. Like it was a high level. Yeah, high in the minors prospect.
Correct. The Dodgers had DFA'd him the week prior, which means he was either going to be traded, released, or placed on waivers. So essentially the Twins made a trade in order to jump the waiver line. That's basically how you can view it. And they traded the Dodgers a rookie ball right-handed pitcher named Jose Vasquez, who was not in consideration for my top 40. Although I will say I very rarely include rookie ball pitchers because you just don't know a lot about him. I mean, he's got a live arm. He throws in the mid-90s. It wouldn't shock me if he becomes a major leaguer. But the odds of it's sort of a lottery ticket. It's the equivalent of like a 7th-round pick in the NFL. It's the lowest compensation you can send is some 19-year-old rookie ball pitcher. Sometimes Luis Gil it really goes against you. But that's sort of how you can view this. What makes Diego Cartaya more interesting than just a typical low wattage trade like this is that going back 2 years, so like 2023 and 2022 also, he was not only a top prospect, he was by some rankings the top catching prospect in baseball, or at least maybe behind Adley Rutschman. He was a top 25 consensus global prospect back-to-back years. And just so people know, that's basically where Emmanuel Rodriguez of the Twins is right now.
That's right.
In that sort of 15 to 25, 30 range as a prospect. And everybody's very excited about Emmanuel Rodriguez.
Right.
So if you go back 2 years, Dodgers fans and the Dodgers were as excited about Diego Cartaya. In the 2 years since then, he has really struggled offensively.
Correct.
That also coincides with him leaving the low minors and being tested first at AA 2 years ago, and then, like you said, at AA and AAA last year.
Yeah.
And here's what I'll say is he's still only 23. I think it's certainly relevant that he was 2 years ago a consensus top 25 global prospect. I mean, that's an elite level prospect. However, I do think that the rate at which those guys are busts, like elite level, A-level prospects, not a super high rate. In general, they at least make the majors and even in Twins history become, role players at minimum. Sure. However, if you were to separate out the top 25 global prospects who have yet to play above single A, I suspect it's a much bigger bust rate.
Sure.
And so I had people...
Double A is often a proving ground.
Right.
And it's almost... Unfortunately for his type of player, which is somebody who can smack the hell out of the ball on a regular basis, right? And looks like it might even be a bigger proving ground because it looks a lot like he was murdering mistake pitches in the low minors.
Right.
And turns out Double A, that the big difference between Double A, the reason everybody sees Double A as a differentiating place is because the pitchers have better control in Double A.
They can command multiple off-speed pitches.
Right.
They can throw strikes when they're behind the count.
Correct.
All that stuff. It's not so much the raw stuff is better, although it's a little better probably because you've weeded out some bad raw stuff. But you don't have guys who just can't throw strikes and have to feed you fastballs and all that stuff. And so, I had people say, like, why has this guy's stock dropped so much in 2 calendar years where he went from an untouchable top 25 prospect that, by the way, they could have traded for any number of star players at that point, to now basically waiver wire fodder that the Twins just kind of jumped the waiver wire line on it. And, well, first of all, you can talk about the reasons. He's had some back problems. He's really struggled offensively back-to-back years. Clearly, the Twins think his stock hasn't dropped that much. I mean, to some extent. They're at least willing to make a bet on it.
Sure.
Because not only did they trade a rookie ball pitcher, which isn't a lot, they put him on the 40-man roster. Now, that could be temporary. They can remove him from the 40-man roster, but you're risking somebody else just claiming him on waivers. But I will go back to what I said, which is like, it's one thing, and this is why on my personal Twins prospect rankings, I tend to far more heavily weigh not even success in the high minors, but just experience in the high minors.
Sure.
My view is always, I want to know more about the guy to move them up the rankings, whereas a lot of places that rank and do a good job ranking, they rank guys higher the less you know about them, which always seems backwards.
Well, because the less you know about them, the higher their ceiling.
Correct. Right. To me, the peak of a guy's rating shouldn't be when he was in rookie ball, but that often happens.
Yeah. We often talk about this, is that you and I tend to pay more attention to the floor than the ceiling when it comes to prospects, or try to find the midpoint, right?
I've been doing this too long, and I've seen too many guys murder single A.
Right.
And you get all excited about them, and then they get to AAA, and you go, what happened to this guy? And so I just don't want to jump the gun on it. And so I think that plays a part in, it's not often that a guy goes from back-to-back years as a top 25 global prospect to essentially being let go for nothing, without a pitcher blowing on his arm or a center fielder tearing his ACL or whatever it is. And he's had some back problems, but he's been largely healthy enough to play. But I think the difference here is, you're talking about a guy who had only played, who was 19, 20 at the time, and had only played at, low A, rookie ball, low A, high A. Right. And I'm not saying that didn't matter. And obviously people scouted him, that the talent was there. But when you don't have any productive track record in the high minors, and then you get your first taste of the high minors and you struggle 2 years in a row, your whatever stock you had built up can disappear much more quickly than kind of an average prospect.
And in the Dodgers situation, they also have a couple of good catching prospects that are on their way up as well. Like at some point, you've just got too many, and you're just we got to make room.
Put it this way: they didn't DFA him last week before trying to trade him.
That's right.
They weren't getting huge offers from people who tried to trade him. So, a couple things about him and just where they put it. Like you mentioned, he does have good raw power. I asked a couple people about him. Pull power, hits the ball in the air, hits the ball hard. The issue, like you said, is he a mistake hitter? Can he be a guy who gets sliced up by good control? Can he control the strike zone? Does he strike out too much?
Might be too patient. He doesn't have the Eddie Rosario strikeout to walk ratio 8-1 strikeout to walk ratio. He's a 2-1 strikeout to walk ratio guy. The question is, was he able to benefit in the low A by guys who either were missing the zone and he could walk, or making a mistake pitch in the zone and he could hit home runs.
Or we're scared of
him. And then you got to Double A, and these guys were challenging him a little bit more.
He struck out, a lot. But the other thing I was told is the defense has improved while his offense has kind of sagged to the point that he's seen now as like a major league caliber potentially.
That was a question of him early on in his career, but what you saw last year was he also played 30 games at DH. And that's
not uncommon.
No, but because
they wanted to get at bats.
They wanted him to get at bats. Also, I think they want him to get at bats while getting the rest that you get with DH, especially for somebody who's battling back end or hamstring.
But I mean,
problems.
think of how the Twins treat the catcher with Jefferson Vasquez.
They
split it. Well, you can do that at AAA too.
Right.
But you want a 22-year-old AAA prospect to get more than 250, 300 at bats. So the way to do that is DH. So if he is a legitimately good, I'm not saying great defender, but if he's a major league average defender, let's say, or can become that, well, the bar for his offense is pretty low at this point. I mean, Christian Vasquez is going to have a 15-year career with, $60 million in earnings and 2 World Series rings, hitting, 250 with 6 homers a year because he's a good defender. So I think that played into the Twins making this minimal investment. I think they're probably holding out some sliver of hope that they can get him healthy and they can get him back on track and they can make this adjustment or that adjustment.
You might feel a little better about that opportunity if he wasn't coming from the Dodgers. If you're coming from the Pirates or something like that,
I will say,
the Marlins.
I looked this up. This is the 6th trade that the Twins have made with the Dodgers since 2017 when Derek Falvey took over. Some of them have been pretty high profile. I mean, you have the
Kenta
Maeda for Brusdar Graterol trade.
Yep.
You have last year's trade, which was positioned as the Manuel Margot trade. It ended up being the Noah Miller for Rain Doncone trade, which actually looks pretty good for them because Doncone's a pretty good prospect. And then you have the Brian Dozier trade, which was more of a dump at that point because he had, and then a few minor trades. What's interesting is, the Dodgers wouldn't be super high on my list of teams to trade with.
Right.
They'd be somewhere around the Rays, let's say.
Right.
In the don't answer their calls. But
they've done okay with them.
They also are a team, much like the Yankees often, who have a very packed 40-man roster.
Right.
Because they always have a lot of veteran players. They have a lot of rehab projects from an injury standpoint, and they have a lot of top prospects. And so there are decisions that have to be made annually of, we can't keep all these guys. And
the Kenta Maeda thing was because Kenta Maeda was a starting pitcher, and basically they already had 5 other good starting pitchers, and they weren't sure exactly what to do with him. He didn't want to be he wanted to be a starting pitcher, not a relief pitcher, especially given how his contract was. Yeah. And I think that is not dissimilar to a formerly top catching prospect who now has fallen into like 3rd place amongst Dodgers catching prospects being available.
And they just need 40-man rosters.
That's right.
That's where the Twins have some more room there. I'll also note that the aforementioned Jeremy Zoll, who's now the Twins general manager and has been an assistant general manager the last several years, came from the Dodgers. They hired him from the Dodgers in 2017 or 18. Yeah. And their new Latin American scouting director, who you may have seen pictured on Twitter the last couple of days because they did a bunch of signings.
Right.
Roman Barinas.
Including somebody who was a Dodgers.
Yes.
And somebody who committed previously to the Dodgers.
So they hired him last year, Roman Barinas, but he worked for the Dodgers in Latin American scouting, and now he's their Latin scouting director, again, from the Dodgers. Right. These are guys who are familiar with Cartaya. Yeah. I mean, he may have signed Cartaya, for all I know, when he was with the Dodgers. So the last thing I'll say on this is that at the moment, the Twins have a full 40-man roster, which is unusual this time of year. And there are, depending on what you think of Mickey Gasper's defense, and I've not heard great things about Mickey Gasper's defense behind the plate. However, he's played hundreds of games at catcher in the minors, including about half of his reps last year at AAA were at catcher. They either have 4 or 5 catchers, or let's say 4.5, let's say, on the 40-man roster. They have Christian
Right,
Vasquez.
yes.
They have Ryan Jeffers. They have Jair Camargo, their own AAA catcher. They now have Diego Cartaya, the Dodgers AAA catcher.
Yep.
And they have Mickey Gasper, who I would probably describe as a first baseman who also catches.
Right.
Even if you want to call that 4, if you want to ignore Gasper as a catcher, the odds of them getting to opening day with 10%, 4 spots
Right.
of a 40-man roster devoted to catchers seems extremely slim to me. Oftentimes, teams won't even have a third catcher
Right.
for long periods on the 40-man roster. Now, the Twins had with Camargo last year, and we saw they barely used Camargo. I mean, they called him up, and he just kind of sat on the bench. The odds of them carrying all 4 and Gasper as like a 4.5 seem pretty slim to me, which again could mean a Vasquez trade.
Yeah.
Or could mean Cartaya and Camargo are essentially competing during spring training
Right.
to be the AAA starting catcher, to be the third catcher,
Right.
to be the next man up.
Or competing at AAA to be the next man up.
Yeah, but I don't think they're going to make it to AAA, both of them, because that would mean starting the season with 4 catchers on the 40-man
No.
roster, which seems very unlikely to me.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, any addition you make is going to require
Right.
a 40-man roster move at this point. So that's worth noting. Before we get into our last batch of little news and notes here, let's talk about BetterHelp. The way BetterHelp works is...
For our sponsor, BetterHelp.
Yes,
Right.
sponsoring the episode. If you have been wanting to talk to somebody about some issue, problem, topic, whatever, the last thing you need is a barrier for entry.
That's
The
right.
last thing you need is something to stop you from getting that help.
You want to do some therapy, whether it's figuring something out for yourself, figuring out something out with you and somebody else, and you've finally kind of come to the conclusion that you want to do that, you are ready to do that, you're ready to make that commitment.
BetterHelp can make that very much easier than doing it in person.
Yeah.
They can typically set you up with a real licensed therapist within a couple of days. They can get it approved. They can also then, once you're selected somebody to talk to, they can tailor it to whatever you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video chat, you can do a video chat. If you don't want to be on camera, you can do a call. If you don't want to be on the phone, you can type to them if you want. They'll set it up with whatever your comfort level is.
That's right.
They can get it working with a real licensed therapist quickly. And by the way,
You can also switch therapists.
if you
right?
didn't have a good experience with that therapist or you just want to try a different one, you can do that too.
Yeah, they have 30,000 credentialed therapists out there with a wide range of specialties. You're going to be able to find somebody you want. And as somebody who's done therapy on things, it can legitimately change your life, and there's very little obstacle for entry with BetterHelp.
Yes, write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Gleeman, and you will get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman, BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. Maybe we'll go to couples therapy on BetterHelp.
That's a good idea.
It's too late for us. Okay. Let's get to a few other random things that I have. So I want to make sure I hit everything here. As you know, I like to.
Yes, I know you don't like
Gotta
it.
cross off my
I know.
list.
Mr. OCD does not want to leave anything left in
That's
his
right.
notebook.
But I try to weaponize my OCD for good.
That's good.
Do you know what I mean?
We got time.
I try to make it detail oriented as opposed to.
We got a long off season still to kill here. Let's empty the notebook.
That's why I had to move out of a house into a condo because I didn't want to have to keep checking if I left the garage door open. That was really the main thing. Just the last thing on Diego Cartaya. I was asked a bunch like because I released my top 40 prospects list 2 days before they traded.
Oh, perfect.
I'm not going to update it obviously, but it's meant to be like just a moment in time. This is
Sure.
what- I was asked like where would he rank? Well, as I said 2 years ago, he would have been one of their 2 or 3 best
Right, of
prospects. He's equivalent to, at worst, like where Luke Keeschel is now, like a top 50 guy.
Okay.
And probably more where Emmanuel Rodriguez is now.
Sure.
But 2 years ago is a long time
Right,
for a
yes.
22-year-old guy who's yet to play well above single A. So where he would rank now, I did less background work on him than I would have if he'd have been in the Twins organization the whole time. But I did ask around about him and got some scouting reports on him and stuff. I think I probably would have put him, for anybody who's read my top 40, in the 25 to 30 range.
Really? That low?
Somewhere around there.
Huh.
To me, you have to view him. It's relevant that he was an elite prospect, but you can't cling to what a guy was at 19 or 20 when they're 23.
Yeah.
particularly a guy who had no track record above single A, particularly for a guy who's had some back problems, and particularly for a catcher.
Right.
Those guys do not develop linearly. They're not like a first base prospect where a guy who slugs is going to keep slugging. Catchers go through physical issues. They develop differently because the focus is so much on defense, all that stuff. They also can kind of outgrow from a physical maturation standpoint, athleticism or agility behind the plate or all that. The 25 to 30 range, for instance, Jair Camargo, I think I had 34th or 33rd.
Okay.
So
I was going to say, does this make him the top ranked catching prospect in the organization?
I would kind of like I said, I would expect them to be sort of competing to be the third catcher. And so I certainly view Cartaya as having more upside than Camargo, but I actually think if you said you have to bet on one of these guys having a 5-year career in the majors as a backup catcher, I would bet on Camargo. If you said you have to bet on one of these two guys,
I would too.
Making an all-star team, I would certainly bet on Cartaya.
Okay.
And so apples and oranges, obviously, but I put him in the similar range. Okay, so let's wrap up with some odds and ends.
Sure.
Spare ends? No. What is it called?
Spare ribs?
Spare ribs. No, burnt ends and spare ribs. Spare ends is what I want to create.
I am ready for some barbecue.
Yeah, John's.
I'm itching for
they
some
didn't
barbecue.
Have barbecue in Australia? They got a Barbie. Shrimp on the Barbie?
Yeah, they call anything they put on a grill barbecue. It's a barbecue.
You need something smoked.
I want something smoked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got stuff you could smoke.
I bet you do.
That's the next, maybe on the Patreon.
That'd be our next sponsor.
People would subscribe. No, I'm saying we.
Oh, okay. I see. We try that.
I pitched
Can you imagine how much I would laugh?
Yeah, it'd be funny to. When we used to do these at bars and breweries,
right?
Back in the day,
we
were gonna do like a once a year, like 100 shot challenge, but with beer, where you line up 100 shots of beer and then every minute. Is it every minute?
I think it was every minute.
Yeah,
that's what you wanted to do, and I was like, I was the one talking sane on that one. I was the one who was saying that's not a good idea.
Well, we would very often get drunk during the show.
Oh, for sure,
and because. First of all, we would do it at a bar, and you drink at bars. But also, once we got sort of an audience and had been doing it and knew some people, knew some brewers and stuff, they would just keep bringing us beer. Like here's our new whatever. Here's a flight of whatever. Right. And John ain't going to pass that up.
I'm not absolutely going to pass that up.
End up arguing about Carl Pavano for 45 minutes. Anyway, let's just hit a few of these. So we mentioned... earlier that Jeremy Zoll is the GM now, as of a month ago or whatever, replacing Thad Levine. He was elevated from assistant GM. Last year, there were 2 assistant GMs, which was Zoll and, we mentioned Daniel Edler a minute ago too. So Zoll was elevated from that, which left the question of, will they sort of backfill that role? They ended up announcing that earlier this week. They elevated 3 people to assistant GM along with the holdover of Daniel Adler.
Right.
So now they have Derek Falvey, who I guess technically is still just the president of baseball operations. I don't mean just, but
not actual president of everything, right? Yeah, until we find out what Dave St. Peter says.
You want to know something? At the luncheon, which is the next time I'm going to see Derek Falvey in person, I'm going to suggest that as the title. President of everything. Imagine how good that would look on a business card. You got the Twins logo. Derek Falvey, president of everything.
Right,
but
there you go.
He's going to eventually, I think, be president of baseball and business operations or something. You have Zoll, who's the number 2 in command, who's replacing Thad Levine. Now you have 4 assistant GMs under those 2. One's Daniel Adler, and then they also promoted Sean Johnson, who's been running their drafts for 10-plus years, or since Falvey took over, basically. He's still going to continue to run their drafts, so he'll be, I think he's like he was like vice president of amateur scouting or something like that. He's now an assistant GM in title. Josh Kolk was elevated. His title was like vice president of like pitching and strategy or something. Right. Who knows? Right. He's a pitching guru. They got him from the Rays a long time ago. I would say, he's taken on more importance or more decision-making weight within the organization on a yearly basis, I would say.
Yep.
And so now he's the assistant general manager. And then the third one is Alex Hassan, who previously was their scouting director, or director of minor leagues,
Right.
which is basically the guy who figures out all the rosters across the minors, signs guys when guys are hurt, promotes guys, all that stuff. He changed that role last year. He went to a different role, and Drew McPhail, who's a third-generation McPhail, took over that role. So now Alex Hassan is the fourth assistant general manager. It sounded like in the press release, again, I'll maybe talk to some people about it in person at the luncheon next week, but it's mostly title changes, not so much scope changes.
I mean, you wonder if there's a differences in who they're reporting to, or whether or not maybe they were already reporting to Zoll. I don't know, or some of them were, or some of them were reporting to Adler previously. So anyway, they're now one team, all reporting to Zoll. I presume is what that was trying to tell us.
You're kind of redistributing the responsibilities. Not only is Zoll taking on more responsibility and probably different responsibility, but they are going to, I think, phase out some of Falvey's responsibilities because he's taking on business side responsibilities. So some of that obviously flows directly to Zoll, but some of it also needs to flow to someone else. And beyond that, some of Zoll's previous responsibilities that he had as like the number 3 or number 4 in command guy need to flow to someone else. So I don't know. It's just the org depth chart restructuring. I mean, I don't know. Do you need 4 assistants for 1 GM? I don't know. I mean, maybe. It's all semantic on some level. I mean, the thing about baseball is, and I'm sure this is true in other like you'll see some companies who have a CEO, and some companies who have a CFO, some companies who have a chief business officer, whatever. Like the names are just what they've decided. I mean, the Twins,
they don't necessarily mean that much about the working relationships,
right? Or even structurally, like who's actually in charge. Right. Like we talked about the fact that Thad Levine was number 2 when he came in, and I guess he was number 2 when he departed. Right. But his sort of the scope of his responsibilities had lessened because other guys had taken on more. Right. So that doesn't necessarily get represented in the title, but that's, I don't know, of note. Let's see, a few other things. So I mentioned Zip's projection, which I think is the first major projection system to come out, has the Twins at 87 to 88 wins. Right. That's based on individual projections are then applied to individual projections, which comes from Zips, which is Dan Zimborski's system that he's had for 30 years. Those get sort of those individual numbers, like on a rate basis, then get applied to the playing time distribution that someone in charge of Fangraph's depth chart has decided is likely for the Twins. Right. And so there's some subjectivity in there, obviously. Like how many at-bats are you projecting for Byron Buxton?
Right. Or Edward Julian, for that matter.
Or Carlos Correa. Right, or, who are you projecting as the 5th starter?
But the point is they're building it from a granular level. Some projection systems in terms of like what we think record is going to be will play out the season 10,000 times or something like that. Right. This isn't doing that. This is taking literally, here's the players here's what we are projecting from each of the players in 2025. Here's what we think their playing time is going to be. Here's about how many wins that is worth. You add up all the wins, and that's how many wins you end up getting. Right.
Correct. And it's generally pretty good. I mean, if you told me you had to risk your life savings betting on, one projection system, not only on an individual level, but on a team-wide level or a division level, that Zips is what I would do.
Well, it's also what we've seen year after year when we do the over-unders is that the over-unders that Vegas is setting tend to come in pretty close to what the projected projections are on this.
Easy picking in terms of, wow, Vegas has them at 85 wins and they're projected for 75.
Do we think that the Vegas is going to have the Twins at 87.5 wins then?
Maybe like 85, something like that.
I'm thinking even lower than that.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I mean, if you think about it, they won 82 in what was certainly not a good case scenario for the team.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know that they're any weaker, really. I mean, who have they lost that you would miss? Santana. Right. But again, it's not a superstar. I don't know that the rest of the division.
I don't think the number's going to be less than 82.5. But I would make it. I wouldn't be shocked if it was 83.5. I don't know if it'll be as far as 85.5.
I bet it'd be over. But I'm not saying whether I would take the over/under. I just think it will be higher than that. Being projected at 87 to 88 wins is not amazing or anything. I mean, that's relatively. I would say that's kind of the Twins zone a lot of the times.
Sure, yeah, that's right.
Over the last decade or for that matter, 20-something years. It's like 85, 88 wins. Not bad.
Right.
But not good, not great. They're not a top 5 team. They're sort of, a playoff contender, but not the division quality also plays a part in that. Cleveland's payroll is under $100 million still. And, the Royals did a lot last offseason, have not done a lot this offseason. The Tigers have done surprisingly little this offseason.
I thought so, too.
And they both have lower payrolls than the Twins, too.
And the White Sox
are
terrible.
Not worth talking about, really. And so that plays a part in it, too. And so I don't want to try to position that as reason for optimism with regard to the Twins, but I do think it matches something we've tried to kind of portray for months now, just talking about the overall state of this roster, which is, and it's easier to do 3 months after the collapse than it was 3 hours after the collapse. This is not a bad team on paper.
Right.
It was not a bad team on paper in August, which is why the collapse was so shocking.
Right.
I mean, the reason why the collapse hurt was that people generally didn't think the Twins were playing above their head.
Right.
And so that's why it was so shocking when they just came plummeting back down to earth. And yet, you couldn't have played worse. I mean, that is one of the truly the worst 6-week stretches in the history of the Minnesota Twins. Right. Certainly in the history of teams that were not.
And that's compared to teams that had lost 102 games.
Right. I'm saying, if you rule out the clearly not trying tanking teams, this is one of the worst. Right. And yet they still had a above 500 record. I'm not bragging about 82 wins, but and so it would make sense to me that you kind of regress that in a positive direction. You get 85, 86, maybe even 87 or 88 wins. But you can sort of chew on that 2 different ways.
Yeah, of course.
The first way is, okay, that's up 5 or 6 wins from last year. That's probably enough to make a wild card spot. It's certainly going to be enough to compete for the AL Central Division, 87, 88 wins generally. It gives you the upside to win 91, 92 and really, have a good season, all that. But then the flip side is, after we just spent the beginning of the show talking about how they've done literally nothing.
Right.
Well, if you're already projected to be kind of a borderline contender, wild card hopeful, 87, 88 wins with literally nothing being done, what could they
How about you try?
Yeah, maybe you make a couple of trades. You bring in a couple of people who aren't making gas.
We've argued this for a year and a half, right? Yeah. We've argued that side. Listen, this team finally got to the point where they were truly a competitor team. Last year, the number was 87.5 is what ended up being the Vegas number. Yep. And our point was, it's shameful that you were on the doorstep of being, a 90-plus win team on a regular basis. And just as you need to just do the last couple steps, the last little push to be able to kind of vault yourself into that rarefied air where you are competing for a true championship, that you cut payroll by $30 million.
Or even that you're very likely to make the playoffs as opposed to a coin flip, let's say, to make the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it,
this is when you invest.
The sweet spot, I'm not even just talking about the Twins, but overall, the sweet spot for wanting to push, put more chips into the middle, add to the team, maybe trade prospects for veterans, spend more money, focus more on the, now as opposed to the future, is basically 80-something wins. Right. That's the sweet spot. Because if you're projected to be below 80 wins, if you're projected to have a losing record, you're just throwing money away, basically. Right. Now, if you spend enough, like the Royals did, you can get yourself into it. Right. But it's not, spending $10 million doesn't necessarily return $20 million in value for a team projected to go 72 and 90. And the flip side of that is, if you're projected like the Dodgers to win 105 games every year, adding a better backup left fielder for $5 million,
right?
It doesn't really move the needle. You're going to make the playoffs no matter what. You might as well just wait till midseason and address your needs there. Right. The sweet spot, and because the Twins are the way they are, they're often right in the sweet spot for better or worse, is like 83 wins, 85 wins, 88 wins, because adding 2 or 3 more wins, the marginal value of that is huge.
The 2 teams that got the last 2 wildcard spots last year from the Twins division, finishing 2nd and 3rd in front of the Twins who finished 4th, had 86 wins.
Right.
So if you're projected to have about 87 wins, those 2 or 3 wins plus or minus that mean a lot. It means the difference between extending and playing yourself into some postseason series in October or not.
And that's with perfect knowledge of how it played out. But even at this point in the year,
but
it's the difference between having a 38% chance to make the playoffs and a 68% chance to make the playoffs or something like that. And think of how horribly the Twins played for the last 50 games of last season.
Right.
Okay. Now that you're done throwing up, if they would have made a deadline move and added 3 wins worth of player,
right,
or spent more the offseason before and added 3 wins, they still would have been a game. One more win in the final week of the season, they would have made the playoffs.
Maybe, yeah.
That's with a complete collapse.
Right.
They were like one good player from actually, you take 2 out of 3 in the last series, you make the playoffs. And so I think last year, they didn't say this explicitly, but I think, and it was logical because Falvey's point this time last year was, the payroll's been cut. That's not good. But we have enough cheap guys that we actually weren't up against the payroll anyway. It keeps us from bringing in guys, but we don't have to make cuts. Well, that's no longer really true this year. But even going back to last year, I really did think they felt like they could just sort of coast to the division title. I think it was not crazy to think that, because Cleveland had taken a step backward the year before and hadn't spent any money. Kansas City had spent a bunch of money, but they had lost 100 and something games the year before. And who knows about the Tigers? No, it turned out all 3 of those teams were better than expected, and the Twins completely crapped the bed down the stretch, and they couldn't coast to anything. They coasted to 4th place, and the team's for sale now. But that really represents the 2, like I said, the 2 ways you can chew on this is like, we're projected for 88 wins in a terrible division. Why don't we just sit here and get that?
Right.
But my point is like, why don't you add like 1 more good player, win 90 games, and not worry about the damn thing, and leave yourself some margin for error. So that's where they're at. And then the last thing,
maybe sell another few 100,000 worth tickets as well.
Too, right. The last thing I want to mention, they also hired A-Ray Adrianza for a player development role.
Yes. Welcome back.
Which is good. I will say one of the most beloved clubhouse type of guys. People still talk about what a good guy he was. A guy who made the most of his abilities, had a decade-long career, even though he was never a top prospect, never could hit for power or whatever. It's also interesting, though. I think he was technically the first major league move of the Derek Falvey regime. They claimed him off waivers from the Giants, I want to say, as like a utility man in either late 2016 or early 2017. And so it is kind of fitting that had 2 or 3 good years.
Was he really the very first move?
I want to say, because he went on the 40-man roster and he made the opening day lineup.
But they had that was the end of the season that they brought him on board. They did. They signed a catcher right away. Jason Castro. That was a month later, right? Okay.
So we'll see. I'm a big believer, and I think the Twins probably are too. It's one thing to bring guys for the coaching staff, but there are a lot of roles in an organization, especially in the minor leagues, but also even like during spring training and roving instructors, that the ideal skill set for that role is a recently retired player who has very good people skills and is old school in that he was a player, but new school in that he understands analytics. He understands some of the stuff they're trying to do with coaching. You are never going to get a better kind of connective tissue between front office and the field than a recently retired former player who believes in what's being taught.
Yeah, probably.
And so there's all sorts of college coaches and minor league coaches and nerd analytics guys, and they have roles and they can speak to people and they can get messages across. But a guy like A-Ray Adrianza walking in or going to a backfield and talking to some prospect, he comes with bona fides that are open ears a little bit wider, and I think they're confident with a guy like him that not only will he get attention, but the messaging is going to be in tune with what they want to talk about. So I think it's a good hire. He's also just known as a good guy. Okay. We will be back
with a free episode a week from Monday.
Yes.
Where we will be releasing
live from the Winter Meltdown.
Our interviews with our 3 special guests, which we're announcing Monday and Tuesday on Twins Daily.
And I know people are probably hearing this and saying...
Two are current players, I'll say that right now, of our 3 special guests.
All kinds of things.
So we don't have a Twins alum this year. We have players who are on the 26-man roster last year.
Well, now you're really going nuts with this thing, John.
I could give more hints, and then also another special guest as well, who's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to talking to him.
You might be saying to yourself, "Boy, these guys haven't really promoted the Winter Meltdown that much. They didn't spend 30 minutes at the beginning talking about where you can get tickets." Well, Twins Daily is where you can get tickets.
Yep.
It's not technically a Gleeman and the Geek event.
No, that's right.
Which I may or may not have shouted to John when I was yelling at him the other day. But here's the other thing. It's we've decided to go to a more, venue based on the presentation more so than the size.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
So we're at the, what's it called? The Underground Music Venue.
Yeah.
Which is, hundreds as opposed
cozy.
To... Yeah, but
it's a cozy. I mean, we basically have 250 tickets, right? That's it.
But it's set up well for not only music but stand-up comedy, stuff like that. So we're hoping that the actual experience for the live audience is perhaps superior even than some of the bigger venues that we've had where there's more hundreds of people.
Yes.
But the other thing is the best way to get tickets, and possibly the only way to get tickets,
I think it's going to be the only way,
is to be a caretaker at Twins Daily.
Which doesn't cost much. It's less than the ticket. The ticket was, if we release the tickets to the general public, they're $60 a piece. The truth is, caretakers can get in absolutely free for like $4 a month, is what I think what you can do, be a caretaker at Twins Daily. And then on top of that, they can also get tickets for their friends for $20 a piece then as well. So
caretaker is basically like the VIP section of Twins Daily.
Yeah, you get special articles. You get a lot more in-depth stuff. Like if you were interested in sort of Parker Hageman or Matthew Truebloods or some of the other national baseball writers that we're bringing in to do really in-depth analysis of position players or pitching mechanics, that sort of thing. You'll get that stuff with a caretaker piece. You'll also be supporting something that you probably stop by and read every day.
Yes, and you can get a free ticket and access to cheaper tickets additionally to the Meltdown. Now, when you think to yourself, what an a-hole your co-host is, remember these last 5 minutes where I created a plug
That's true.
for your website that I'm not involved with and make no money on.
Out of thin air.
And what a remarkably nice, kind gesture that is for me to do. But so anyway, the reason is, the thing's going to sell out.
That's true.
And it's going to probably sell out before tickets are offered to anyone publicly because it's going to be filled by hundreds of caretakers.
That's right.
So you should be a caretaker because then you can come to the Meltdown. And if you're not a caretaker, fortunately or unfortunately this year, it's going to sell out without you. So that's why we're not plugging.
We will be trying, as we've usually been successful.
There might be a few
eight
tickets.
of the last 10 years, we have managed to record it and release it as a Gleeman and the Geek episode.
Yeah, it's kind of outside of our doing.
That is,
we're relying on audio engineers to, do their job, which seems easy and has proven to be difficult.
Not always the same. I think it's been. Yeah, I don't even want to jinx it by saying how many years in a row it's worked right now, but
not enough.
Not enough. Speaking of us plugging things, we want to thank our sponsors, which is BetterHelp, Factor, Prize Picks, Harry's, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. They're now distributed all over greater Minnesota, so stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room to grab your favorite brewer, try something new. We will be back a week from Monday with, hopefully, audio from the Winter Meltdown. If not, you can check us out on Patreon next week. It's Twins Fest week next week. We will probably be leaning into some beat writers, some special guests, talking about any news that comes out of Twins Fest, and there should be some.
Some other beat writers?
Maybe. Some others. That's right. Bye.
Gleeman